Thank you to all of you for being here for this very, very important discussion. Um, it's less of a book promotion event, rather a discussion that I have been holding all across the country at various forums. Because I think educating on climate is of as much importance as writing a book or sale of that book, essentially. Because and I and I've also reached out to Ministry of HRD to look at introducing climate as a subject. I know environment and pollution are subjects in our schools, but climate is a different genre, and I think an early understanding of the subject would help our future citizens to understand this better. Me and Navinita had a discussion before we started exploring what we're going to say today, and we thought we will also do some discussion on some basic points about what is sustainability, what is sustainable development, what is climate change, because these are words which are thrown around, and we often just confuse it with environment and pollution. It actually is not so. We need to understand them as concepts, and what is really happening in policy space, technology space, finance space, what is happening in jurisprudence globally, Indian jurisprudence. So let's start with. So I'll do is over the next 10 minutes or 15 minutes, I'll just discuss about the book. What does the book cover, and then we will start our discussion. Okay. Uh, Essentially, this book is multidimensional book. It is comprehensive and meets an urgent appeal to reimagine how we govern one of our most pressing challenges of our time. This book weaves together environmental science, legal frameworks, policy analysis, financial mechanisms, global strategies to confront the complex reality of climate change. At the core of this book is it rejects the outdated view of climate change as merely an environmental concern. Instead, it presents a multidimensional issue, a problem that intersects with law, economics, human rights, governance, and technological development. Its central thesis is that fragmented responses, both globally and nationally, have proven ineffective. Without integrated, enforceable, justice centric legal and policy framework, the gap between climate promises and climate progress will only widen. The foundation of the book. This book opens with clear and urgent message that climate change is a planetary emergency. It is not a distant threat, but a present and escalating crisis. Scientific data, particularly from Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, provides that foundation. The book goes beyond data, it focuses on people, especially the rising number of climate refugees displaced by rising seas, extreme weather events, and food insecurity. I thought I had only read about this till I went in March this year to Malta. There was a Commonwealth Lawyers Conference, and I was addressing a session on climate justice. Some lawyer from the Caribbean sitting in the audience rose after my presentation and said, my house is actually 6 feet below the sea level. The government has built a wall around the coastal waterfront, but I am sitting 6 feet below the, the sea level. So it is actually a reality which is facing a lot of human beings across the globe. And therefore, today, if you look at her, what is the asset value of that house? I mean, if she wants to leave and become a climate refugee and go to Australia or somewhere else, she really has lost all the money on that house or that asset. So this is creating displaced by rising seas, extreme weather events, and food insecurity. These individuals, the book notes, are still not recognized under international refugee protections. This is a book with result of years of research, frustration, and hope. It is written to bring together the fragmented worlds of science, policy, finance, innovation, and law into one cohesive framework because time for piecemeal efforts has long passed. The book is organized into 8 thematic chapters, each representing a critical pillar in the climate discourse, from the foundational science to global treaties, national implementation, and emerging legal trends. Each chapter builds on the last to provide a holistic understanding of climate governance landscape. Climate science and legal recognition. The first chapter sets stage with scientific evidence. It explains the causes and impacts of global warming, greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity collapse, rising sea levels, and intensifying weather patterns. But critically, it introduces the legal implications of the science, how courts, law, and international treaties must acknowledge and act upon scientific warnings. The concept of climate refugees is discussed not as a futuristic concern, but as a present day legal gap. This framing creates an early bridge between climate science and law. This chapter traces the evolution of global climate agreements, the Vienna Convention, the Montreal Protocol, the UNFCCC, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement. While diplomatic milestones are acknowledged, the book offers realistic critique. Many of these agreements lack binding enforcement mechanisms. For example, the Paris Agreement relies on voluntary, nationally determined contributions with no legal accountability for non-compliance. Legal doctrines such as common but differentiated responsibilities are examined, highlighting the global tension between climate ambition and climate equity. Climate policy and India's legal framework. The key strength of this book is its focused examination of India's climate governance. It analyzes the National Action Plan on Climate Change and the 8 national missions, such as those on solar energy, water, agriculture, and sustainable habitat. India's updated NDCs, reducing emissions intensity by 45% and sourcing 50% of electricity from non fossil fuels by 2030, are highlighted. Yet, the book does not shy away from addressing the implementation hurdles, bureaucratic fragmentation, and the need for stronger intergovernmental coordination. It emphasizes the proactive role of the National Green Tribunal and the Indian judiciary in advancing climate justice using tools like polluter pay principle, the precautionary principle, and the right to healthy environment under Article 21 of the Constitution of India. So the book also touches upon climate technology. It's not just focused on climate law. I think if you don't understand science and technology around climate, you will never be able to understand the subject of climate. The fourth chapter explores the role of technological innovation in combating climate change. It reviews advancements in solar and wind energy, green hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, and electric vehicles. The book asserts that while technology holds enormous potential, it cannot function in isolation. It must be supported by strategic policies, financial incentives, and international collaboration, especially in enabling technology transfer to global south. Climate finance and equity. This chapter identifies finance as a linchpin of climate justice. It explores green bonds, carbon trading systems, the Green Climate Fund, private investments, and public finance instruments. It critiques the failure of developed countries to fulfill $100 billion per year climate finance commitment made under the Paris Agreement. However, the book highlights the rise of greenwashing, where entities falsely claim climate friendly practices which erodes public trust and accountability. The need for equitable, transparent, and need based financing mechanism is emphasized as essential for climate adaptation and mitigation in global south. Comparative analysis is provided through case studies. Countries like the United States, where the Inflation Reduction Act was brought in by the Biden government, the European Union, where its Green Deal and the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism will come biting at Asia and the rest of the global south, Japan in leading hydrogen fuel innovation, Brazil in managing forest conservation alongside development, Saudi Arabia's transitioning from fossil fuels towards diversification. These global perspectives underscores that while there is no one size fits all model, mutual learning, and policy coherence are crucial. And then we come to the final chapter, which is on climate litigation and legal accountability. This chapter charts the rise of climate litigation as powerful tool for enforcing environmental commitments. It examines Urgenda versus Netherlands, where courts mandated stronger climate action, Lagari versus Pakistan, which upheld climate protection as a constitutional right. Same has been done by the courts in India in 2024, in March 2024. Juliana versus United States, where youth sued the government over intergenerational climate harms. In India, climate related rulings on pollution, mining, forest degradation showcase how courts are evolving into climate accountability platforms. The book anticipates a surge in PILs, transboundary dispute, and investment treaty claims. There is an entire section of annexures and legal resources given as part of this book, which is part two of this book, and constitutes legal texts, treaties, case law excerpts, and policy tools, transforming the book from a theoretical exposition into a practical toolkit for policymakers, researchers, litigators, and students. In its concluding remarks, this book delivers a powerful message: we are out of time. Climate change is not waiting for political consensus or financial convenience. The law must rise to match the scale of the challenge. The world must move from voluntary pledges to binding obligations, from fragmented policies to coherent legal action, and from diplomatic performance to accountability and justice. This book is not just a chronicle of challenges, it is a blueprint for reform. It equips readers with intellectual and practical tools to engage with climate governance meaningfully, critically, and urgently. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Mr. Cheema, for that summary of the book. I think a lot more if you delve into it. And thank you to everyone for being here. There are not enough forums where we are able to discuss topics like this with people who are outside the work that we do in the sustainability and the climate space. So having the opportunity to engage with people outside of the framework, with everyday people, and because this affects our everyday life. Before we start and we have a discussion with Mr. Cheema, I want to give a quick story. A professor of mine of developmental economics used to always say that climate change is a churning. And he used to say that every day to us and drill that into our head. And that always reminds me of the story that my parents told me when I was younger of Samudra Manthan, where the oceans are churned for nectar. And the first thing that surfaces is not the amrit, but halahal, which is the poison, right? This poison is so potent that it could darken the skies. Um, Creation could only continue because someone could hold that poison back. Well, our growth story of human beings in the last 2 centuries is somehow like that. We have created prosperity, development, we have industrialized, we have made our everyday lives easier, but that came at the cost of a poison in the commons, which is the greenhouse gases that we have had to emit to be able to do that. Now, climate action asks us that we do three things to mitigate that poison. One is that we contain the poison, that we contain the emissions and further harm that we are creating in the environment. Second is to care for those who are already hurt by this poison, and that is what we call adaptation and mitigation, right? That we make up for the loss and the damage that is caused to people already in the last 2 centuries. And then that we set rules that keep us from creating more of this poison. And that is where Mr. Cheema's book comes in, where we talk about the law and the policy frameworks to be able to do that. Well, tonight, what we'll try to do is look at these rules and ask a simple question: what actually works and what must we do next? Thank you, Mr. Cheema, for having me here and to BIC. In the next 40 minutes, we will split the session into 3 sets. The first set we want to look at, like Mr. Cheema also alluded in his opening remarks, is looking at the shared vocabulary of climate, right? There are a lot of words that get thrown around in the newspapers and in climate discussions that seems very distant from everyday conversation. So we'll try to break that down. Second, we will look at what is the global rule book? What are the global policies? How is it affecting the policies back home here in India? And lastly, we will look at where India is right now. What is the progress that we have made? And what are some of the barriers that maybe we have put for ourselves for that change to happen? So, to start off with, Mr. Cheema used this phrase when we were talking in his opening remarks. Is the word called it's a phrase of global commons. What is global commons? Now, if you think of it, it is like the staircase in your building where it's not owned by everyone, but everyone accesses it. If something happens to it because of someone else, it affects your lives. And that is much the atmosphere that we live in, the actions here could affect people outside of that physical space. And that is the global commons. Mr. Chima, when courts and treaties speak of protecting the global commons, what duty of care falls on industrializing states? Is there a minimum standard that applies to everyone, irrespective of income? What are your thoughts on this?
So I think you're alluding to uh, essentially the principle of CBRD and RC, common but differentiated approach. Um, Essentially, what is so for a layman, if you need to understand, industrialization has happened across the globe at various times and in various continents at its different pace. For example, industrialization happened in Europe and United States during a certain period, late 17th, early 18th century. There was a great sort of movement towards industrialization. Uh, it came much later because we were in South Asia, we were governed by the Western power. So some bit of industrialization happened here, but not at the pace at which the Western economies were achieving it, or rocking it, so to say. Uh, and therefore, the emissions that have happened from that industrialization are the historic emissions. Okay. So I'm going to give you an example. If the total carbon budget is 100, for example, uh, that is what it will take for a tipping point from 1.5 and above degree temperature across the globe. Um, and if this industrialization in the 17th, the 18th centuries happened in the Western economies, where they have eaten away almost 70% of that budget. Okay. So who's responsible historically for these emissions? So when we talk of greenhouse gas emissions, we are talking about carbon dioxide, we're talking about methane, and what is the third one? Uh,
Noxious
yeah,
gases.
noxious gas. But what I'm trying to say is that essentially that is the carbon budget you have eaten away is about 70%. So what is left for the developing world when it comes to their chance of developing? Okay, 30% of that 100 is left for the developing world now. What is the Western world telling us? Western world, what we are telling the Western world in the common but differentiated approach, which was accepted by 186 countries in the Paris Agreement, was that while we will all make effort, but we all have differentiated approach because our emissions historically have been different. Okay. Therefore, the responsibility of historical emission lies with the developed world, and therefore you must input $100 billion towards carbon financing every year. Therefore, as a result, which has never happened by it's been 10 years, that number has never been achieved. So what I want to say is this was what the CBDR principle was. Okay. But it was practically it has never been done. Okay. We have heard over the last COP that happened, COP 29, we have heard voices where they're saying that the developing world must equally contribute. Now that sounds a bit unfair. If you have basically emitted over the last 200 years, and we have just about started our development, the cost of it must be borne by you and not by us. And therefore, that's where this common but differentiated approach needs to be understood. And that's what the developing world is asking for. And that's why it is asking for that $100 billion to be funded towards the carbon financing that is required under the Paris Agreement. I just want to read you one paragraph on this CBDRC doctrine. It refers to a environmental degradation with transboundary impacts such as greenhouse gas emissions, plastic waste in oceans, and ozone depletion, the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. RC stands for respective capabilities, acknowledges that while all states share the responsibility to address environmental issues, developed nations bear a greater burden to their historical contributions to emissions and greater capacity to respond. So that's essentially where the debate is. And that's what is going to be, I think, hotly debated even in Brazil later on this year, COP30. I have been part of some discussion with the Brazilians in Delhi on that subject. So I think this will be now with the United States pulling out. I think it will become very, very interesting to see how it all pans out at COP30.
Which incidentally, the indigenous communities there have been complaining that indigenous forests have been
The
culled
Amazon forest has been.
to make space for COP, right? So that just tells you, even in the climate world, no one is perfect. With respect to what Mr. Cheema just said, essentially, fair share does not mean equal share. What is fair is that those who emit more and can afford more should pay more and should contribute more
Correct.
towards it.
Correct.
So it'll be interesting to see what happens in Brazil.
Absolutely.
And as an extension of this into the loss and damage fund, uh, and how this topic will be risen again, because though there was some consensus in the last COP, the island nations weren't very happy with the total amount that was adjudicated towards the loss and damage fund. So we'll see how that shapes out. Now, coming to, because we were talking about this aspect of it, mitigation, adoption, and just transition. Those are three words that keep getting used everywhere and has been uh, in every COP for the last 10 years. So mitigation is, for example, is just putting out the fire, right? What needs to be done in the moment? Adaptation is, okay, what do we need to do next? How do we make sure that the people are safe? Do we need to put water sprinklers to make sure that the fire doesn't spread more? And the last aspect is just transition, which is that how do we change existing systems so that people's livelihoods that depend on conventional business as usual scenarios, how do we make it easier for them? Example could be, let's say, people working in the coal district, and for generations people have been working in these mines. What do we do if we are phasing out coal? That is just transition. Mr. Cheema, for that, what's a legally meaningful just transition in India, or even is there one? um, could it be a tariff design? Could it be about retraining funds for coal regions? Could it be social protection laws? What do you think could be that could work in the legal mandate that would help with just transition in the Indian context?
So, in Indian context, if you see, we will have to see where are the maximum number, where is the maximum amount of carbon dioxide and methane coming from? It's essentially coming from burning of fossil fuels.
Mhm.
Okay, the and it goes back a step backwards if we go. I think we need to look at how we produce our energy. Okay, and I often talk about EVs and I put a question mark to that. Okay, and I'll tell you why I put a question mark to that. Now, you'll have to see the chain, how that energy is produced. Okay, essentially, if you're burning coal, and producing electricity through thermal power plants. Okay. Now that's directly fossil fuel burning. Okay. And I'm just coming to the basics so that everybody understands where we're coming from. And if you are charging your EV vehicle from burning fossil fuel and through a thermal power plant, look at the chain. Coal going to thermal power plant, produce production of electricity, and you're charging your EV vehicle through that. Is it is it green all the way? No, it's not green all the way. Okay. Therefore, I think what we need to look at is in terms of allocation of how we shift from the production of our energy from coal, which is today almost more than 50%, if you look at it. You know, we import rest of the energy, about 85% from the other parts of the world, from 7, 8, 9 countries from across the globe. So, and that is all in form of crude that we get. We also get some LNG as a fuel, which is a much cleaner fuel than as opposed to fossil fuel per se. But we are yet to sort of make a big transition to hydrogen, which is an alternative. The green hydrogen, we already produce gray and blue hydrogen. That is still
Byproduct of existing industries.
Correct. So green hydrogen is what will really revolutionize in terms of our transition. Nuclear energy, which is much more cleaner. Okay, I think the government now recently has started looking at it more closely. I think that's a welcome step. We need to look what are the alternatives for us vis-a-vis transitioning from coal to green fuels or less polluting fuels, which does not produce SO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions. So I think that would lead to the really clean transition from the past into our future. Okay, how we produce our energy is a core of it. So energy transition becomes a very, very vital aspect of our transition in India. And I think that would solve a lot of other problems.
Yeah. The aspect that you were talking about with nuclear energy, it's something that's a little close to my heart. I'm a little obsessed with it. But there was an International Energy Agency study that said that for the world to achieve net zero, according to the Paris Agreement, and for warming to be under 1.5 degrees, nuclear has to be part of the energy mix. So what we're talking about, different sources of energy, that's called the grid mix. Essentially, the power that comes to your house doesn't come from a single source. It comes from multiple sources, and everyone is trying to reduce the total carbon impact of that energy grid on a given day. So electrification is merely a two-step solution. Greening the grid is the larger systemic approach to the solution.
For example, France, look at France.
Yes.
90% of energy produced in France is nuclear, if you look at it.
Yeah, and in comparison to Germany, which used to have 36 nuclear power plants, after the Fukushima disaster, which happened across the globe, a lot of people had the nuclear scare. And basically, overnight, Germany shut down, other than 5, almost all of its nuclear power plants. And they saw the brunt of it in the last 5 years with the war, because they were importing a lot of their natural gas from Russia, and that led to energy insecurity for Germany itself, to the extent where people were selling coal shells in the black market during the winters in Germany. So tells you how short-term action really affects long-term achievement, even as simple as a reactionary mechanism to have in your policy perspective.
So it has to be a mix of natural gas, LNG, nuclear,
Yes.
Green hydrogen. I just was reading this morning that India is going to look at running a train with green hydrogen,
Yes.
which is already happening in China, which is already happening in Europe.
And in shipping, it has been,
and
yeah,
shipping.
it's been very successful.
So I think it's a time tested. It's only about how do we now sort of
Make it safe.
make it safe, and also I think from move away from upscaling it from R&D to real implementation in
Yes.
projects.
Yes. So Airbus does this really interesting study and work in the Southwest in the UK, where all they're trying to do is creating a green hydrogen economy.
Correct.
So there is a lot that we can borrow from there to see how we can create a green hydrogen economy in micro locations
Correct.
instead of looking at a central plant. Moving a little ahead from the policy perspective to the expectation that people have from courts, right? People think that courts can do anything, that they are the panacea. But at the end of the day, they interpret laws, they set guardrails, but they don't make or write these tariffs. Yes, the court's recognition of right to be free from adverse climate impacts can reshape India's future. But I was wondering if there are instances where, in India or elsewhere, where courts have recognized the climate essentialities. However, the reality on ground has lagged. The outcomes, however, haven't paid off, even though the courts have supported such actions.
So I think we'll have to juxtapose India's position vis-a-vis what has happened in the West. The jurisprudence in the Western world, if you really look at it, uh, this is not to undermine. I mean, our environmental jurisprudence is fairly robust, I must say. We were the pioneers in some of the principles that the world has followed. Okay,
Every textbook had an MC Mehta case.
correct,
Yeah.
correct. Even the global books covered MC Mehta in one form or the other. So I think in terms of environmental jurisprudence, I think our Supreme Court has done wonderfully well. And it started way back in the 80s, when European courts were not even looking at it from that deeply. But they have they have they have been ahead of us in terms of climate jurisprudence, okay, and particularly in the human rights space. So the litigation, which is part, you will read in chapter 7 of the book, which I've authored, is that essentially European courts, American courts, other courts around the world, where, for example, 5 elderly women have gone to the European Human Rights Court and said that government is not doing enough to protect our health, okay, and therefore my right to life is jeopardized. Okay, um, young children have gone to the court. Uh, One example of I'll talk about the horizontal effects of climate change. The Shell judgment of 2024 is a prime example of that, where it's not left. See, fundamentally, the constitutional rights are basically vertical. It's from citizen to the government. For the first time, the courts in Netherlands have now recognized that those rights can also be horizontal. Okay, horizontal how? If a company, a private company operates and creates adverse effects of climate change, which is likely to affect the health and the well being of the citizens of the country, then the courts will also go horizontally to this company and penalize them, okay, or give directions to them. And Shell case is one example of that. So, what I'm saying is their jurisprudence is well ahead, but we are not behind. In 2024, if you know, in March 2024, the great bustard case that we all know, enough has been written and spoken about it, and I won't spend much time on it.
If you can just summarize briefly.
Sure. So, what happened is that in this particular case, MK Ranjit Singh is basically a forester, and he filed a writ, and eventually it came up to Supreme Court. So I'm actually now not going through what had happened in the NGT and other places. In Supreme Court, basically the argument was that the great Indian bustard is a very rare species in Rajasthan, and these overhead electricity transmission setup is affecting the health, and basically these birds, when they fly, they get stuck into these wires, and a lot of them are dying. So essentially this litigation, this was the basic premise of that litigation, and therefore entire transmission lines in the state of Rajasthan, including the desert area, should be put underground. Okay, so that was his premise, to which I think court took a very balanced view. You know, we are not a developed country. We are a developing country. So it looked at what? It looked at India's commitment. There are four things that court did, our Supreme Court did in that particular case. And I think uh, the ratio in that case was very important. And I'll come back to the four principles a little later. The ratio is it has now our fundamental right towards adverse effects of climate change. Okay, that is a now recognized right read into the Constitution of India by virtue of M.K. Ranjit Singh's judgment. Having said that, the court said that there are there are there are global principles and treaties to which India has signed. Okay, we need to respect those treaties. Number one. We also need to look at the stage of our economic development as a country. Okay, so this has to be balanced. There are four principles which they are trying to balance. The second principle is that we are a developing country, so therefore we cannot do things what probably a Western court can do or a Western economy can do. So therefore that needs to be balanced. Okay, number three is obviously it said that we want to protect the rights of the great Indian bustard, which is also a rare species per se. And the fourth principle that courts enunciated was that while the NDCs we have committed in the global arena, we must also look at developing our own climate jurisprudence, and this right was brought into effect by the fourth pillar in that judgment. Okay, so there were four things that were done, and I think a very well balanced judgment as far as Indian jurisprudence is concerned.
And on a side note, if you have some time later, please Google the Indian bustard. It is quite a beautiful bird, so
Yes.
it'll make you more passionate about this. Now, extending this towards the reference that was made towards the Paris Agreement. Now, it is said that the Paris, or we keep saying that the Paris Agreement is legally
Should we
binding.
touch the ICJ first,
Uh,
or a little later?
a little later,
Okay,
a little
fine,
later,
fine.
that the Paris Agreement is legally binding for the process. So essentially, the Paris Agreement also states that countries must prepare, communicate, and maintain an NDC. As Mr. Cheema said, NDC is a nationally determined contribution. Essentially, you have to record what it is that you're doing to reduce or stall emissions. What are the actions that you're taking as a country? So that's what an NDC is. Now you have to report these emissions and the progress that you're making. So you set a goal and you have to also report on how you're meeting these goals and if you're meeting these goals. And you have to undergo a review by a technical committee, and which makes sure that you're accounting correctly, right? What is, however, not given or enumerated in the Paris Agreement is with fines is how ambitious your target is, right? So, given the architecture of this legally binding agreement that most countries are signatories to, including India, what actually forces this change? Is it peer pressure? Is it the markets? Is it the financial accountability? How do we get countries to comply with these NDCs and make sure that they are in line with the commitments that they have made?
So I just want to clarify the Paris Agreement. Insofar as signing of that agreement, we are a party to that agreement by virtue of that. But the nationally determined contributions are voluntary. They are not binding. Okay. So I am saying, for example, the Glasgow summit, two summits before last, India said that while the rest of the world is going to achieve its net zero by 2050, we said that we will achieve our net zero by 2070. So obviously, our government and our sort of institutions which are involved in this debate and who are implementing various policies must have figured it out that in terms of our own development process with 1.4 billion and perhaps 1.6 billion or 7 billion by the end of 2050, what do we need to do? So we have put our net zero target at 2070. That was what was announced by our PM at the Glasgow summit. But having said that, so that's a difference. So it's voluntary in nature. NDCs are not compulsory. But what is interesting is the latest advisory opinion of the ICJ. That's where the ICJ opinion comes in. Now it talks about voluntary NDCs in the judgment, okay, which has just come on July 23rd of 2025, a few weeks back. And it has talked about how you cannot just keep it voluntary, okay? And there could be punitive damages which you could bring, and how that mechanism is yet to be refined. And I think even lawyers are grappling with understanding in terms of how that aspect of the judgment will be implemented.
It's almost commit and comply.
Yes,
right?
commit and comply kind of a thing. So if you are saying that in the previous NDC, now we're going to give a new NDC, our new NDC commitment will come in the COP 30 this year. Now, how do you implement that and how you comply with that? I think with ICJ judgment of 2025, the advisory opinion, again, not binding. It's not binding on country. It's an advisory opinion. It's an advisory opinion. But nevertheless, I think it will have its own bearing in terms of how governments across the globe will see and determine their NDCs. My guess is they will be more conservative in terms of how and what numbers they project in terms of achieving by 2050 or by 2030. There is another sort of milestone at 2030. We have said that our goal of moving away from fossil fuel to green fuels will be 50% less of fossil fuels by 2030. I mean, that's our commitment that we've given. And I'm reading in the papers that the government, and some quarters I've read, I've yet to confirm that we may have achieved that, but I think that's subject to confirmation. I'm not
as the
sure.
Government keeps saying, subject to technical review.
Correct,
So
correct,
this
correct.
has also
Subject to-
happened.
correct.
This has also happened in the past with the Montreal Agreement,
Correct.
Where we have pushed the deadlines. Just an interesting note on the ICJ case that was just talked about. I think this is a beautiful example of collective action. This ICJ case that came up. So essentially, there were 27 students in Fiji who decided that, you know what, we need to go to the highest court possible. And they're just students, nothing special about them. They got together and they decided that for the future of the island nations, we should figure something out. Essentially, they then got together other student organizations from the Pacific Island countries and created a consensus and then decided to go to the ICJ. During that process, one of the countries, Vanuatu, said that they'll lead this exercise and got 103 countries to sign this so that it could go to the ICJ for an advisory opinion. I think this is an example that we need to take to show that consensus creates change. And this was also the judgment in which they were, I think, if I'm not wrong, the most number of oral statements that were given in an ICJ case.
Correct.
So
I
there
think
was
the
collective
court was
support.
very liberal.
Yes.
Court was very liberal. If you see how the submissions have been made, it started in 2023 March.
Correct.
Then it kept giving extensions after extensions. When new countries said, we also want to give written submissions, they said, okay, we extend the deadline by 3 months more. Okay, so if you read the judgment, it's all written there. How many extensions they've given to various countries to give their written submissions, and then later on to give their oral submissions as well. They accommodated almost everyone, including the international organizations, to make remarks or their submissions to the international ICJ, so that it could be a well-rounded opinion. Incidentally, my book has actually, the foreword has been written by one of the sitting judges of the ICJ.
Yes.
And so it was very interesting to hear him when I made a request to him to write the foreword. And thanks to him, when the book was published and it was released, he took 15 copies of the book, 16 copies actually, and he said, one copy is for the ICJ library and one copy for each judge of the ICJ, since we are actually reviewing this matter. at the moment. So very, very interesting times that we have been through.
Yeah.
So I have also have got a small contribution in the whole process.
I think the most interesting part for me for this judgment and the process was also the detailed, statements that they took from the IPCC scientists,
Correct.
which and a lot of times, Mr. Cheema and I were also talking about this in climate litigation. The voice of science gets lost, and the fact that this was taken into account and also made part of the advisory. Opinion where they stated that yes, science can help us state who has historic liability, which we now have to see what effect that has on the loss and damage fund.
Correct.
And how this will shape the conversations in Brazil. Just can you touch on that for just a minute? On ICJ stating that there is science for us. It didn't state the countries, but it said that there is a way for us to calculate who has contributory, effects
So contributory
historically.
damages,
Exactly.
how are you going to calculate? So it's very interesting that, while it says that we can, one country or a group of countries against the next country can claim damages, they said we will use the science as a route, okay, science as evidence. As a matter of fact, we often talk about environment and pollution. Actually, at the background of all of this is science. Okay, it's all an evidence-based, science-based material that has to be produced before any court as far as the climate litigation is concerned. Okay, whether it is and best recognized science in the space is by the IPCC, and so therefore courts have said that that would be the underlying material for us to determine the compensatory damage that we may impose in a future case that may come before them.
Yeah. And
now, I think how that will play is yet to be seen.
yes.
But it's all actually been sort of captured in the judgment.
Correct. And also, in previous COPs, it was very specifically stated that contribution to the loss and damage fund means no liability.
Correct.
Now, with this statement, I'm interested
I think
to see what
will
happens.
be very interesting to see what happens in
Yes,
and
absolutely.
how governments come out with their own respective statements.
Yes.
There.
One thing that I notice, and even in the book, is private action against corporates, right? And we touched on one of the cases, which we did with Shell.
Yes.
One other example is Friends of the Earth versus Total Energies, which, yes, the judgment didn't come in their favor,
Correct.
but it wasn't dismissed for there being no grounds. It was dismissed because the arguments were different than the petition that was filed before the French courts. So, what interests me is to understand, do you see activist shareholders or private citizens filing cases for climate action in India, or does the Indian legal framework allow for that? We haven't seen a lot of that happen here. We have seen a lot of cases being filed, PILs being filed against the government, but not against private entities. So I wonder how that will shape in the next few years.
So I think in terms, this all needs to be seen from a director's liability perspective. There is now clearly a climate risk as a matrix, which because the essential duty of care that is required uh, on behalf of the board and the directors on the board. I think that if you read into the duties of the directors, I think it will create some space for bringing some action against boards who may not be as climate conscious as some of the others. So I think that matrix will come into play at some point.
Which, interestingly, I think just today, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs has just tabled a report in which it has recommended these changes to be in the Companies Act, and as well as creating supplementary regulations to make one ESG department separate to SEBI.
Correct.
Right, and also bringing directors' liability so that there can be private action. I mean, it doesn't stay private action, but for climate action to be part of director's liability,
it will come into play. You will see in a few years time, all that will come into play as this jurisprudence settles.
Yes.
and the statute settles and the regulations settle, you will find uh, perhaps private citizens moving against private corporations,
Yeah.
saying that the directors of this company are not, just in the case of Shell,
Yes.
where a group of individuals, milieu defense in
Yes.
that particular case, they all came together and said, this company is not meeting the goals of climate action as they're required to be. So, and I think the greatest sort of, I think the best paragraphs of the Shell judgment, I say, is on duty of care. And I think that every director or a member of a board should read. It may be in the international sphere, but I think it has implications for boards across the globe.
I think we are running a little out of time. We
Okay.
want to keep 30 minutes or 20 minutes for Q&A. So very quickly, we'll go to the next part of our discussion, which we want to talk about India. What is the progress we've made and what are the contradictions in the goals that we have set for ourselves? And one that comes to mind now, with it being in the news recently so much, is the Great Nicobar case, right? Where the government essentially is investing 80 crore rupees for the development of the Great Nicobar Islands. There is public outrage here and outside of India. So it is at the crossroads of national security, development, and ecological duty. Interestingly, India's NDCs state that one of its commitments is that it is going to create a carbon sink through afforestation, amounting to around 3 gigatons by 2030, right? So also there's then this project which removes biodiverse forests, covers, and disrupts island ecology, and undercuts these carbon sink goals that we have given for ourselves, and in some ways doesn't allow for adaptation or resilience in such a delicate ecosystem. So what would then be India's response to this criticism? How do we justify this?
Okay. So I think if you read in the newspapers, every single day, perhaps one or the other article talks about sustainable development. Okay. So I'm just going to read out a two-line definition of sustainable development. It's defined in the Brundtland Report of 1987 is a development that meets present needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Okay. Now, whether it is development of those islands, okay, in terms of disturbing the existing biodiversity, okay, or as we were talking earlier, the case of Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand for that matter, we kind of devastation that we are seeing year on year that is happening because of human intervention. The kind of human intervention that has happened in the biodiversity and the ecology space there, we have ruined it. Okay. And therefore, as a result, we are finding what are the climate events that are happening. This morning, I got news that it has just been simply pouring in Delhi. Okay. And my colleagues could not reach the court. They were taking all their hearings online. Fortunately, we have that facility in Delhi where you can attend a court online. And they were taking it from cars, and I was taking it from my hotel room here in Bangalore. But having said that, I think whatever development that we do, we must keep in mind the intergenerational equity. Okay. I think that's very, very crucial in terms of what we are going to leave behind for the next generation. You see, remember we started with a carbon budget? Okay. Now that budget is depleting every day. Your and mine coming here this evening has a carbon footprint. Okay. We are all creating emissions by coming here. Not that we should stop that. Okay. But there is a way to counter that. Okay. I'll give you a small example. before I published this book, 2 years before I published this book, I actually laid a mini forest. Okay. I laid a mini forest to offset the printing of this book. Okay. It was a Miyawaki forest laid of some 1500 plants. And today, if you see that Miyawaki forest, you can't walk through it. Okay, it's absolutely totally dense forest. Till about a year and a half back, they still had some passage left to service the forest, but now that passage is also closed. But what I'm saying is, it's all about individual responsibility at the end of the day. Okay, the government, the courts will pronounce its judgments, the governments will do their work. Okay, but at the end of the day, it's your and my planet. Okay, and if you and I don't take care of it, I think we cannot shift the blame on somebody else. So, how do I reduce my carbon footprint is something that we need to review on a daily basis ourselves. You know, we have actually been a land which has lived in a very traditional way for centuries. Okay, we are moving away from that. Okay, um, and some parts of the country more than the others, I would say. So therefore, we need to look at all of that. So look at the life program. If you know the MOEF life program uh, for sustainability. So I think sustainable development is what we need to look at for making sports parks and for building water sports. I think there's enough oceans and seas that we have. Don't think biodiversity should be infringed for that purpose. That's my personal view.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about life, I mean, the life of Shompen people matter as much as our lives here on
Correct,
the
correct,
mainland.
correct.
And there is no way that compensatory afforestation can ever,
Not at
ever,
all.
you
It
know,
takes hundreds of years to put a
a
natural
millennia.
forest.
Yeah, a millennia to create the kind of
Correct,
ecosystem
correct,
that
correct,
that the Great Nicobar Islands have right now. So
correct.
I hope
Especially
that
the mangroves and all, which
yes,
you can't build a mangrove over 50 years.
yeah,
They are
yeah,
built over centuries, you know.
yeah,
So to displace that for some, so therefore sustainable development.
yeah,
You know, we
and
need development,
endangering.
but it has to be so the matrix of sustainability and climate action must come into play into any assessment of project that we do. I think that's what is very, very important. We're going to put up a building next door. We should do our environmental assessment report with the matrix of climate and carbon footprint. How
Interest.
much carbon footprint is going to create?
Yeah.
How green is that building?
Yeah. Interestingly, the UK has done a
Correct?
great
Absolutely.
work with this, especially
So
with the
there is
built
examples,
environment.
if you see,
Yes,
Navinita, in the book,
yes,
if you
yes,
see,
with red.
I've given examples of how private enterprises like Microsoft and others have actually done work on sustainability. You know, today, if you see AI, we are all talking about AI. AI is going to create a lot of carbon footprint and
Yes,
carbon
and water
emissions.
scarcity going
Yeah,
beyond
yeah, yeah.
carbon. Yes,
Absolutely. You know, to power all those AI sort of centers, you would need more fossil fuel to burn. So I think that transition needs to happen. We are all talking about AI being a big sort of it's going to be intervening into our lives, but I think it's going to disrupt a lot of stuff. But also, there's a big AI impact vis-a-vis climate change.
yes, absolutely. And we are seeing that activism happen right now
Correct.
in the US, in California,
Correct.
against Meta's, AI power banks,
Correct.
right? Because essentially people have no water to drink who are around these data centers, right?
Correct.
Just touching upon one last, we head to the Ridhima Pandey, is the Indian carbon markets, right? CCTS has been on the books for the longest time. It got notified in 2023.
Three.
They were supposed to create an organization that then passed on the CCTS to function in the market. However, there has been no talk or movement
I
on
think
it.
there is some notification. They have identified some
Yeah.
certain industries which has just come in July.
Correct.
But I
Yes.
think the whole, the entire sort of operationalization
Mhm.
of CCTS is yet to happen.
Correct.
And I
Correct.
think that will play a very pivotal role. And I think I have always been an advocate as far as the carbon credits trading system. CCTS stands for Carbon Credit Trading System. Now, the credit trading system also needs to go down to a common man. You know, it doesn't need to be only for institutions. It should be for individuals as well, because that, according to me, will bring individual climate action into play.
And I feel like now it's need of the hour with
Correct.
CBAM just knocking
Yes,
down
absolutely.
all walls for Indian business. So CBAM is cross-border adjustment mechanism that is passed by the EU. Essentially, let's say there is a piece of plywood, right? There is a piece of plywood that is produced in EU by companies that are in EU, and there is plywood that is produced here in India. Now, because EU has stronger environmental laws, how that plywood gets made, the total carbon impact, which is called embodied carbon, is much lower than, let's say, the plywood that is sourced from India. Now, the border mechanism says that we can't let this happen. One, our businesses inside EU are paying the cost for it, and essentially, if anyone's importing this, then if there is a total cap for a particular product, if you exceed that cap, then you have to pay a border duty, right? Now, the context for this is around 40% of India's steel gets exported to the EU, 28 to 30% of aluminium gets exported to EU. So, a
Correct.
lot of India's heavy industries depend on EU for business, close to 1.8 billion
Correct.
every quarter. So, we have been in discussions with the EU for the longest time. We have not come to any consensus. However, one of the points that they make is that India doesn't have, a emission set goal for heavy industries.
Correct.
So I guess now is the time for us to legalize the framework and for us to
Correct.
put it into practice.
Correct. Correct. Also, I think Japan has been really talking a lot about CBAM, because they also export a lot of steel to other parts of the world. So Japan has actually been at the forefront of this carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is seen by us, India, as a non-tariff barrier, essentially. And about 2 years back, I wrote an article on this in the Business Standard, how this is impacting us and the Japanese and other such heavy industries in various parts of the world. So I think that's worth reading.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to give more context, so if CBAM was to be law today and India had to comply, it would be around 5,000 rupees per ton of CO2. So
Correct.
to give context, to uh, to manufacture 1 ton of steel, let's say that we use for construction every day, it creates 3 tons of carbon in exchange, right? So just do the math. That's how expensive it's going to be for them to import, and that's how much business Indian heavy industry is going to lose. Coming to the last part of this, and we wanted to keep this, and that's how we wanted to cap the discussion, is with the Ridhima Pandey case. So, just for context, so Ridhima Pandey case is a 9-year girl from Uttarakhand who filed a case in NGT, saying that the legal regime that's regulating carbon emissions, that the country isn't doing enough, and that framework isn't as strong as it should be, and it's not aligning uh, with the Paris Agreement. The NGT gave a final order stating that it's assumed that if there any environmental laws that are in India are effectively in compliance with the Paris Agreement. Now, this has gone to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court flagged the need to examine the legal regime regulating carbon emissions and appointed Mr. Cheema and Sudhir Mishra as amicus curiae to assist the court in the matter. So I'll let Mr. Cheema take the floor and give us more context.
Okay, so I'm not the party to the litigation. I am an amicus to the court, and I'll pretty much stick to my written text on this because it's the matter is sub judice.
Yes.
Navnita has already shared the basic facts of the case. it's no different from, remember I had earlier mentioned in our conversation about 5 European women, elderly women, uh, filing a case against the government saying that you're not doing enough in climate action. It's affecting our health, therefore, it's affecting our right to life. And therefore, the government should take some more climate action and protect our health. Uh, so this is no different from that, and I think it's the first carbon emissions case in India of its kind. Um, Having said that, um, there are two orders which have so far been issued by the court. One order came in February of this year, where court has recognized the importance of climate action and climate change as an important aspect of discourse before the courts. And I think that order is here. I have the copy of the order. Um, the last hearing, since this is all a matter of public record, so I'll only talk about that. Um, Let me talk about the approach of the court on this for a bit. The approach of the court is that all parties, whether Ridhima Pandey or Union of India, or for that matter, even Amicus or the judges for that matter, everybody is affected by the adverse effects of climate change. Okay. And therefore, all the parties need to work together to find a solution. So let this not be an adversarial process. Let this process be more conciliatory, where we hear each other's views and find a solution to it. So I think that's what I read of the court in that matter. Okay, and I think we have been twice reminded of that. That this is not an adversarial process. This is a process where we want to achieve positive results, and that positive result would mean positive for India, and all Indians for that matter. Okay, having said that, so last date of hearing, and this is also in public domain, so I can talk about it. The court has now issued notice to through MOEF Ministry to CEA, the Central Electricity Authority, and the what's the other authority that? Huh? Yeah, no, the Ministry of Power and the Ministry of our regulator, electricity regulator. Um, no, the central regulatory regulator. So the three parties and the Ministry of Power, where essentially what we had raised was that uh, there are 540 thermal plants in the country. In 2015, the government of India itself had issued a notification where they had said that we find that the FGD, flue gas desulfurization technology, is good, and therefore we will implement this to control SO2 emissions. Now, mind it, SO2 is not greenhouse gas emissions, but SO2 produces PM 2.5 particulates, okay, which are very, very injurious to health. The thermal power plants over the period kept getting extensions. So 2 years, 3 years. And in December of 2024, the government gave the final extension of 3 years. Now it has come out with a notification in July, I think 13th notification, where it has said that FGD is not perhaps necessary, and we will look at it from a case to case basis. The notification is there in place. So we said that, it seems that this is like shifting position from what was the original position. Therefore, that has now, all those three parties have been asked to sit and discuss and make a reply. And I think we are awaiting a reply from the ministry. So that's where the case is right now. I think we're all working together in that matter.
Uh, any s- any similarities between the Leghari versus Pakistan case and this? And do you see that having any effects? Or most importantly, is there anything that we can learn from the Leghari
No, so
case in regard
Lagari is a
implementation?
constitutional.
Yeah.
I think that moment was a great bastard moment. That moment has happened, as far as I am concerned, where a constitutional court has read in the Article 21 into the right to life. against adverse effects of climate change. So I think that moment has happened.
Okay.
This is more, I think, again, as I had made the submission in the court as well, that, this is all evidence based and science based. My science can't be different from yours, because if science is common, scientists may differ in terms of the solution,
Yeah.
but science will remain the same. If it produces PM 2.5 particulate,
It's just
nobody
fact.
can dispute it.
Yeah.
You can measure it. Your scientists can go, X scientists can go, Y scientists can go, and you can measure it. So I don't think so. I think as long as we keep the course on science and evidence based, uh, I think we would reach a positive solution. I can only hope so.
And on that hopeful note, yay science.
Hello, I'm a medical student, and so I came from a public transport. I came from a bus, and that was not a choice for sustainability. That was you can say a need because of the income situation. So my question is regarding that. Um, I don't know the exact statistics, but the majority of the emissions are caused by the top 1% of the population, and seeing the blatant indulgence that is celebrated also in our country, isn't this the responsibility of the courts to put a cap on these kind of like, okay, there is a need for awareness, but the common man is like, isn't the right to life of a common man being infringed by the wealthy uh, population because of their like blind consumerism, and as we saw in like the Ambani wedding.
Let me not comment on that. Okay, let's keep the debate on climate.
Yeah,
Okay. I think your question is valid, very valid. The fact of the matter is, as I said earlier, it's a responsibility of every citizen. If I say, how do I care what my neighbor is doing? Um, how do I care what my community is doing? If I have that attitude, that I don't think we will ever win this debate. Okay. I think it starts with individual action. I always believe in that. Okay. You took the public transport to reach here. It could have economic reasons. It could have any other reason for that matter. But the fact of the matter is that you have probably created lesser carbon footprint. The only problem is that that bus must be fueled by diesel. You know, so that's where the issue is. So that transition needs to happen, as we talked about earlier. That just transition has to come in, where if I would love that bus to be fueled by a natural gas or LNG for that matter, or by green hydrogen for that matter. And that we are waiting for that moment.
If I can just add to that, actually, sadly, a lot of urban design is for the 2% of India, right? Bangalore has a ridership of 4 lakh, if I'm not wrong. Sorry, 40 lakh, if I'm not wrong, right? That's a bus ridership. So these are the number of people who take the bus. However, the number of cars in Bangalore are double the number of people. What does that tell us? That tells us that we sitting here in this room are complacent, right? We are also part of that 2%. A lot of us here are part of that 2%. That's the reason why sometimes civic action cannot be on the goodwill of people. Sometimes it needs to be forced on people, right? The reason why people in Europe, however rich they are, it's easier for them to take public transport is because mobility is a solution, right? The bus is not a single solution. In India, it's easier if you have money to take the car because it's convenient. And when people have money, they use the convenience. We need to start thinking at the place where we are right now. India is right now is perfect, right? We are at the point where there is development, but there's more development to happen. So that means systems are ripe for change and to be molded in a new way. So let's think of mobility and every other way that we live life, not from some other perspective, but through the perspective of can we reimagine the world we live in. So I would say Convince a friend who uses a car to not and take the bus with you one day, right?
I want to give you an example, statistic. Let's look at Delhi is always in news for pollution and environment. You know what causes Delhi's pollution? Apportionment. Apportionment is that about 30% of it comes from transport. Okay, so it is energy emissions. Okay, that are happening. 30% comes from construction dust. The construction that is happening around in our localities, that's where PM 2.5 and PM 10 is coming from. Okay. Then there's road dust. Okay. Then there is 20% industry and other stuff and thermal power plants, and then seasonal thing that happens in November, December. That is about 2% for us. Although there's a lot of noise about that in the media. But what I'm saying is these are the big numbers. Huh? So we need to look at from a pollution perspective. I'm not talking about climate perspective.
Mhm.
From pollution perspective, we need to look at what are these sources and how do we control them. Okay. And I think it's a dynamics of politics that people are not able to take decisions that they should be taking decisions at times.
I was about to say the same thing, talking about complacency, of whether it's the obsolete knowledge or a lack of exposure of the people who are in the political space, or making decision and laws and all that, or executing them. Do you think? I mean, we can talk globally at another time, but we need to first speak about our own country and even limited cities. So when they are not, do you think, like, even some like the NGT, don't you think that they also give in to political pressure, corporate pressure, and things like that? And like he's talking of the pollution in Delhi from the building and all that, it doesn't come in place uh, voluntarily from the government until there is a hue and cry in the media or the public, or something like that happens.
Do you mind?
I'm
I'll
just,
pass
I'm
it
just,
on to
my
you.
my
No, go
question
ahead.
is just that, are the groups as effective and working as hard? Even NGT, which is supposed to be the,
No, NGT has definitely been doing a great job in India. Yes, it's never a perfect system. But coming to the first question that you asked, right? Is climate a voting matter for anyone? Has anyone voted?
that's my point.
Right?
That's
So
exactly
we
my
choose the people who serve us in the legislature. They didn't just fall out of the sky, right? We are the ones who put them in power. Have we made this a matter? Is this an election issue? Should it be an election issue? In a lot of ways, it is an election issue in some places because they feel the brunt of climate change, right? If you look at coastal India, right, the climate migration that happens in India, a lot of these are issues for people, but it's not the issue of the 2%. For us, what matters is the lines that we draw in ideologies and not in the realities that we exist in. Find a way to communicate with your people, and action does start at home. If you feel like climate is not being given importance to, now we don't have any like BBMP has not been functioning in Bangalore for the longest time, and the erstwhile BBMP. But anyway, create a community cell. Talk to people in your community. Can you do something in the place that you are in right now? And that is the network effect that will have. If we don't make it a part of our life, it will never be important enough to make it part of a political space, because they will not care because we don't care, right? So that apathy kind of knocks on from one to the other. With regards to NGT and the other comments, I'll let Mr. Cheema respond.
I think NGT is doing a great job. I think the latest judgment which has come out now on pollution, with there were several judgments of the Delhi High Court which the Supreme Court has recently reviewed and said that the precautionary the damages per se are now, the teeth has been what has been untethered by the Delhi High Court judgment. The pollution control boards, DPCC, the state pollution control boards now have been given their teeth back in terms of imposing damages, okay, and compensatory damages on industries which may be violating the norms, or for that matter, anybody for that matter, who may be violating the Air Act or the Water Act. They were examining Section 31A and 33A of the Air Act and the Water Act in that judgment. So it's very interesting that courts are playing a very, very proactive role. But mind it, it is also all of it has to come together. The legislature, the executive, the courts, and the people. Everybody has to come together to surmount this. And I have no doubt that we can't get over it. We can get over it. Government also has some successful, very successful programs. It's only about getting to that. Okay. I mean, it's not that everything that the government does is not worth it or it's bad. There are a lot of successful programs of the government of India. Okay. So I think we should appreciate that. And even this elephant can be surmounted. We can mount this elephant also if we all come together on the climate issue.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Shalmali. I just started my grade 11, and I'd just like to say that this session has been very informative so far. Excuse the device, I'm just referring to some notes that I had written. So, you brought up carbon markets and carbon credits and how you do support them to some extent. So, I had a question regarding that.
Sure.
So, obviously, carbon credits, I'm talking about this at a global scale, right? So, to me, it sort of seems like wealthy nations at this stage are buying credits instead of cutting emissions themselves. It's like asking someone else to do your homework and then taking credit for the grades. That's what it seems like to me, right? And obviously, it gets more complicated because you have ITMOs, you have ERs, you have all of this, which get verified through the clean development mechanism. And also, those tend to be more skewed in favor of developed nations as well. So it comes back to the whole ethics morality principle. So, my question to you is it not just a giant loophole? Why aren't we doing more? What can be done?
So if you see, there's a lot of action on mitigation. Okay, we are doing a lot of action globally and in India on mitigation. Okay, I think we need to accelerate on adaptation. Okay, and I think that's where we have been slow. Okay, adaptation is something that we need to bring in as part of our policy process, its implementation process, bring into our daily sort of understanding and in the daily sort of discourse. That is missing. And I think my personal feel is that's where real action is required. Okay. Mitigation front, there's a lot that is happening, by afforestation, by carbon capture. CCUS is one of the mechanisms, although the government had come out with that plan few years back, 4 5 years back, with great gusto. Nothing much has moved on that, and I would really appreciate some real action in that space. But I think adaptation is where we are lacking. I think adaptation is what we need to do, work on. You want to add to that?
Yeah, just adding on the specific question of isn't this a loophole? So there's something called the voluntary carbon mechanism.
Correct.
Right? So there are frameworks on how should carbon trading or even creating a voluntary carbon market work. Now, yes, these are regulations. Are they perfect? Are they implemented perfectly? No. But there's something called additionality, which is that you basically, let's say you want to buy a carbon credit. Now you cannot offset that for actual work that you do. It has to be additional to to culling your own carbon that you have to do, right? That now there are instances, and there are plenty that come every day in the news. And because I'm from that space, I can tell you that even large organizations like Terra, Vera, all of them, on a maybe a fortnightly basis, there are projects that when people go and audit, they realize that those do not exist. Now, the advantage of this is that we have GIS systems, we have satellite information now. So technology is helping the way forward. Do we need the carbon trading mechanism and carbon credits? In some way, yes. Again, this is something that I don't completely agree with and I haven't made up my mind about. But I feel like some action is better than no action. So let's make the system stronger instead of saying let's not have this as a solution at all, because it is a part of the bouquet that we need to have.
So I'm Dr. Prakash. Actually, in this particular subject or topic, I can say I'm on the basement. I'm on the basement, I said. So actually, we have got groups, and I'm into social service. These things we are fighting for the environmental issues, including this. So here, what I want to know is, because the discussion is on the increase in carbon, we are also facing health issues, this, that, and everything. Whereas the other substitute for this is, in olden days, we had hydro electricity generation where we didn't have any pollution or anything. And now, because that is not sufficient, we have gone into thermal plant and all those things. And now we are into wind energy and solar energies. To what extent has India achieved in these two aspects? To what extent it can still further go up to reduce the problem what we are facing? So this is what I require.
So I think the prospect of wind energy is very limited. It's only certain sections of the country. Okay. In certain how many years had it been? 30 years, right? And since 30 years, if the leaders, so to say, at that point of time, our representatives over the last 30 years had taken, as somebody said, it doesn't get you votes. Is it part of your debate? Okay. Had taken that as a central focus, having signed that treaty, had made it a central focus. Okay, and I'm not particularizing anyone. Would you have seen climate events that you're seeing today? Okay. Now, corollary to this is, and that's why we can't wait. Okay. The reason is, my worry is, and that's where I think people will rise. And so will our politicians, executive, everybody will rise. And I think that's a great area of concern, is going to be the food area. Okay. When climate starts affecting the food chains, you will find that there will be a sudden awakening. Okay. And everybody will talk about it. It is already happening in certain parts of the world. When you cross that 1.5 degree benchmark, your crops will start burning. It will start affecting your yield per acre. Okay. The moment that happens, then everybody will talk about it, and it will start directly affecting you, and then you will see how this debate will become central to all our conversations. Okay. So therefore, I think before that moment comes, we need to look into this now. We don't need to wait for 30 years from now, because after 30 years, we don't know what will be left of it. Okay. So I think it's very, very important that we start working on it now, as an individual, as a community, as a nation, as a state, whatever way. I think we need to sort of rise and shine on this issue.
Sadly, the reality of the food aspect is already here, right? There is a recent report, and I'll try to find it maybe after this discussion. I can look it up for anyone who needs it. Is that climate-related food inflation has been an issue for the past 3-4 years now, right? In India and in the African countries, in the southern Indian subcontinent, and also in Africa, there have been months in which climate related food inflation is responsible for 30% to 45% of rise in cost for food. It is a reality, right? However, it is not an irreversible reality when it comes to food, right? Food security is possible, but for that to happen, the thing that you were alluding to with respect to the green energy transition that India is trying to take is this thing that we sometimes forget when we're talking about policy, which is co-creation. How can we work with it? Has to be multilateral. It can't be individual. India can't solve the food problem, right? Or Africa can't fight the food problem. We will have to all solve it together. And it's the same thing that happened with solar energy. The reason why per unit cost of production per gigawatt, solar is lower than fossil fuel now is because scientists and the global community, businesses came together to create solutions to make it better. And for that to happen, that's the future that we need to look forward to for everything.
Increase by 1.5 to 2 degrees has had a adverse effect on the settings of our coffee blossom. Our harvest, our production has dropped due to the increase in temperature. The other thing I'd like you all to know is that the European Union has now asked us that we need to give them a certificate saying that we are not growing coffee in deforested areas. You know, and the other thing about the gentleman who spoke about public transport, you see, if you compare it to the Western world, the quality of their transport is much superior to ours, and their population is minuscule compared to ours. So it's a quite a difficult task for
Balancing act.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
It is, it is, it is. So therefore, I think that's why I said let's not wait any further. With the growing population, already this crisis looming at our door. I think the time has come that there is more education on this, and there is more public debate about this. Public debate not to pressurize anyone, just simply create awareness. People are not aware. We are just going about our daily lives and we are not even aware what we talk about it because we see all these climate events happening, sudden thing in Kerala, sudden thing in Himachal, now recently in Uttarakhand we had that cloud burst and blah blah blah. you know all these are events that we talk about, but they are a reality. you know and we will witness more of these climate events as time goes by if we don't stem the tide.
Thank you everyone for coming here.